Zechariah chapter 2 and verse 8. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, after the glory hath he sent me unto the nations which spoiled you. For he that toucheth you toucheth the apple of his eye. Israel is the apple of God's eye. Now, I don't want to offend anyone needlessly, but for most people, I'm going to just tell you the truth. For most people, how they feel about Israel and the Palestinian-Israel crisis depends on their political affiliation. If you talk, most conservatives are pro-Israel. Most liberals are pro-Palestine. And we see that demonstrated on the streets around the world. Those who are conservative will tend to back Israel, and those who are liberal will tend to back Palestine. And I'll go further in saying this. Your political affiliation will also affect which media outlet you subscribe to. Now listen to me, there should not be conservative news and liberal news. There should not be. Unfortunately, today there is. There's no such thing as unbiased news. Years ago, maybe I'm ignorant, but it seemed that years ago, the journalists, the media, they'd show you videos and they would tell you facts and they'd give you data and information, and they would leave it up to you to form your own opinion and to form your own conclusion. Today, they tell you what they want you to think and what they want you to feel on both sides. And so if you're subscribing to a quote-unquote liberal news media, you're going to be fed only that which you agree with. Everything in the world on the liberal side. And if you subscribe to a conservative media outlet, you're going to be fed only those things that you agree with. And so you're going to see things only from the conservative side. No, friends, this is what we're talking about today is not political at all. It shouldn't be political. It is biblical. And what I want to talk to you about is not Democrats or Republicans. I don't want to talk about liberals and conservatives. I want to talk to you this morning about biblical truth. Now, the true issue is not political, but biblical. We have to go back. We have to go way back. And in a moment, we're going to go back to Abraham. We're going to view the beginning of this whole thing from Abraham, but it goes back even further. In Isaiah, and I'll tell you right up front, Isaiah, I believe, he's talking about the king of Babylon, but it is a shadowed reference to the fall of Lucifer, the fall of Satan. You with me? And God says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Isaiah, I believe, this is a shadowed reference to Satan's fall. God, and he said he's going to be like God. Jesus said in John chapter 10 and verse 10 that Satan has come to kill and to steal and to destroy. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 12, therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Satan he stood against God. He challenged God on the throne, and he was cast out of heaven. And he has come to this earth to kill and to steal and to destroy. And Revelation 12 tells us that he knows his time is short. And because of that, wickedness and sin is accelerated and it is increased over all the land. That which would be most precious to God would be the greatest target of the devil, would it not? The true issue is a spiritual one. It is a spiritual battle. Israel is the apple of God's eye, therefore ground zero for any satanic attack. Does that make sense to you? Am I... Okay. So now we'll look at where all of these national things have begun. We have Abram, later to become Abraham. Abram and Sarai, later to become Abraham and Sarah. Abram, he settled in a land called Canaan, the patriarch of faith. Now he stands in a foundational place in what's happening in the world. We can't discuss Israel-Palestinian crisis and conflict without going back to look at where it all began with Abraham. Now, Canaan was the grandson of Noah, right? The son of Ham. We find that in Genesis chapter 10. So Abraham settles in a land called Canaan. Canaan, the man, was the grandson of Noah, the son of Ham. But Genesis chapter 9 and verse 25, and God cursed Canaan. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. This is important to know. So this land where Abraham settled, it has its origins in a man named Canaan who was cursed by God. Noah had gotten drunk. Remember Noah? Flood, he lands on ground. And Noah gets drunk, and he's lying in his tent naked. Now, I have to tell you, I don't believe that Noah intended to be intoxicated. They made wine. It was non-fermented. It was fruit juice. It was part of their diet. And sometimes the fruit juice would ferment accidentally. The Bible says that we're not to partake of strong drink, but it would ferment. And I believe that Noah's wine fermented, and accidentally he was intoxicated. He didn't plan on getting drunk, but there he is. And he's laying in his tent naked. Now he's got 3 sons. He has Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And they come into the tent, and lo and behold, there's Pops naked. And so Shem and Japheth, they turn around and they go outside and they get a garment and they back into the tent so that they could cover their father's nakedness and hide the shame of daddy laying naked. But Ham, I don't know what was in his mind, but he's fixated on Pop's butt. I don't know. Like, I don't know how else to put it. And God says, because you have shamed your father. This is disrespectful. This is dishonoring your father. And because of this, your descendants will be cursed. And in fact, you and your descendants are going to serve your brothers, Shem and Japheth. And so Ham is cursed. And his son, Canaan, would receive this curse. So Canaan is cursed because of Ham's disrespect against his father Noah. Are you with me? Okay. He and his descendants would be the servants of the descendants of Ham and Shem. This is very important to know going forward, that Canaan was cursed by God and would serve the descendants of his brethren. Now, you look at the descendants of Noah. Genesis chapter 10, verse 14, is the first time that the Philistine is mentioned. Philistine, this is the beginning of the Philistines or Philistines, and they are the descendants of Ham. And they settle they settle all over here, but look, you'll see where Canaan settles. So you have Noah's descendants, Gomer, Magog, Togarmah, Put, Cush. These names sound familiar to you? You're going to see these later on in prophecy as the nations that surround Israel. Ezekiel 38 and 39, that war, they're going to surround Israel. They're predominantly Islamic, although Islam didn't exist back then. And they're forming a coalition with Russia and with China. What do you see in the news today? You see the Islamic nations within a coalition, and you're going to see it more and more and more. Everything that happens, you trace back to these nations surrounding Israel, and Gog of Magog, which we believe to be Russia, all part of this plan, right? But I want you to see where Canaan settles. Canaan settles in this land. You still with me? Yes. All right. Now, Genesis chapter 10, verse 19 says, "And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou comest to Gerar unto Gaza, as thou goest unto Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah, and Zeboim, even unto Lasha." This is the area of Canaan, right? This is where Canaan settled. This is the land of Canaan. And you'll notice here in red, this is modern-day Israel. Israel didn't exist. It didn't exist as people. It didn't exist as a land. I just left it in there in red so you can see in relation. This is Canaan. Still there? Okay. I'm sorry. I probably said that another 5,000 times. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 5. "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came." God promised Abraham three things. He promised him land. He promised him that he would be a great nation. His descendants would be a great nation. And he promised him that there would be a blessing that would affect all nations of the earth through him. Now, because he was faithful, because God said to Abraham, "I want you to leave your land, I want you to go to where I will send you." And Abraham didn't even ask, "Where am I going?" He just trusted God. God counted that to him as faithfulness. And then the Lord asked him, "Take your son," Isaac later on, "take your son, your only son, and sacrifice him to me." And Abraham didn't even flinch. He was more than willing to do what God had said. And God says, there's righteousness. You are a man of faith and faithful because you were willing to trust me even when it didn't make any sense to you. God promised him land, that he would be a great nation, make of him a great nation, and that he would bless the world through Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verse 7. "And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him." So God says to Abraham, "I will give you this land." Where is Abraham when God said that? He's in Canaan. God says to Abraham, "This is the land that I will give you." That's my promise. This is the land that I will give you. So Abraham was sojourning in Canaan. Does this look familiar to you? So Abraham sojourns in Canaan. God promised Abraham this land to his descendants. Abraham had two sons. One of the flesh, Ishmael, and one of promise. Now, Isaac, when he is born, he went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, Abraham sojourned in Canaan, and now his son Isaac is sojourning in Canaan as well. Abraham spent the rest of his life in Canaan, raised his family, tended his herds, dug his wells, and then died. Isaac now dwells in Canaan. He redigs the wells his father had dug, but he's resisted by the men of Gerar, who are the Canaanites. The Canaanites are resisting Isaac. They did not recognize any claim of Abraham or now Isaac to the land that God had given him. Genesis 17, verse 21, God says, "But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, with Sarah which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year." So God is telling Abraham, I promised you this land, I promised you this seed, and now I'm promising your seed. I'm continuing the same promise I made. Your wife's going to bear a child, Isaac, and I'm promising you the same thing. The same land, the same promises are now extended to Isaac. Genesis chapter 26, verse 24, "And the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake." Isaac settled in Canaan. Now, Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. They're twins. We know that Jacob was a rascal. In fact, his name, Jacob, means twister, supplanter, conniver, cheater. He's a liar. He's a manipulator. He gets what he wants through manipulation. And if you know the family history, apple didn't fall far from the tree. Mom's pretty good at that as well. And so it's a dysfunctional home like most homes. But Jacob is a rascal, and he tricked his brother out of the birthright that naturally came to Esau, being the firstborn. Esau was enraged with this trickery, and so he sets out to kill his brother. Jacob. He sets out to kill his brother Jacob, but mom instructs him to get out of Dodge and go to Uncle Laban's house, and there you'll be safe. And so Jacob escapes his brother Esau, goes to Laban, which is outside of Canaan. He left Canaan to go to Haran to flee from his brother's wrath. And he took wives from Laban's house, not a wife from Canaan. He did not want to take a wife from Canaan because that was against his father's wishes. Isaac didn't want either of his sons to marry a woman of Canaan. Remember, Canaan is cursed. I don't want you marrying anybody from this land that is cursed. They were cursed because they were idolatrous, cursed because of Ham's sin, now passed down. But they're idolatrous. They worship idols, and so Isaac doesn't want either of his boys marrying anybody from Canaan. Jacob goes to Laban, marries Laban's family, but Esau, in rebellion against his father, marries a Canaanite woman, and these are the descendants. His descendants are now the Edomites, and Edom. It was a constant problem for Israel throughout the years. So Esau's descendants, they're a problem for the people of God. Esau was in rebellion and married a Canaanite woman. You still with me? Okay. So Jacob lives with Laban. He lives there for about 20 years. He works and he serves Laban to marry his two daughters, Leah and Rachel. There's a bunch of manipulation and a lot of deceit going on there. Laban, again, part of the family. They're nuts. It's pretty rough. But Jacob now, God is dealing with Jacob, and Jacob wants to go home, and he wants to make amends with his brother Esau. So he starts heading home to Canaan to meet with Esau to make amends. And he comes to a place which is later called Peniel, which means the face of God, because when Jacob is there, he meets God face to face. Now, the Bible says that he was wrestling with a man, but the Bible calls this man the angel of the Lord. So Jacob he's found wrestling with this angelic being. Now, we believe that this is the pre-incarnate Christ. In fact, we know it is because Jacob calls him God. He says, I have seen God face to face. Peniel. So he wrestles with the pre-incarnate Christ, and he says to the Lord, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. In other words, I'm tired of being Jacob. I'm tired of being a twisted supplanter. I'm tired of being who I am. I want to be changed. God wants to change him. And so God, in this wrestling match, he allows Jacob to prevail, but he touches him and changes him. He says, no longer will you be Jacob, a twister, a supplanter, a cheater. From now on, you're going to be called Israel. Now, Israel, there's two opinions as to what that name means. Some believe it means one who strives with God because of the context. But others, and I believe, it means a prince with God. So God says, you're not going to be Jacob anymore. I'm going to make you a prince with me. Your name is now Israel. This is the man Israel. And his descendants would be called Israel the nation. Still with me? So this is where Israel, the land, comes from this man Israel, who is a son of Isaac, who is a son of Abraham, who had received the promise of God regarding the land of Canaan. Jacob settles in, Jacob, who is now Israel, settles in Bethel. Bethel, which means the house of God, is in Canaan, right? So Jacob now settles in the land that God had promised his father and his grandfather. Genesis 35, verse 12, and the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. So God takes the promise that he made to Abraham and Isaac, and he renews it to Jacob. He renews it to Israel. God's promising the land to Israel. Now, Jacob has two sons. One of his boys, Joseph, has 12 sons. 12 sons. One of his boys, Joseph, is sold into slavery by 10 of the other ones out of jealousy, the coat of many colors and so forth. So they sell their brother into slavery. He goes off into Egypt. We know the story there. He winds up serving Potiphar, and then there's a problem at Potiphar's house, so he's thrown into prison, and from prison now he's taken out, and he's in Pharaoh's house, and he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and Pharaoh makes him second in command of all of Egypt, and he's prosperous. But there's a famine in the land, and that's part of what Joseph saw when he saw the dreams of Pharaoh, and he interpreted. He said, "There's going to be a famine, and this is what you need to do. You need to reserve, the grain in the time of plenty for when the time of famine comes, and you'll prosper." And so this famine comes, and the land of Canaan is in this famine. And so Jacob tells his sons, go off to Egypt, the remainder of his sons, go off to Egypt and there buy grain and bring it back home because there's no food in Canaan. So they do, you know the story. And they reconcile with Joseph, their brother, and then Joseph brings all of Israel, all Jacob, Israel, and his clan into Egypt. And there they prosper for 30 years. And Another Pharaoh arises after that 30-year period. He doesn't know Joseph. He doesn't have any respect for Joseph. And he sees the number of Israelites, Jacobites, he sees the number increasing. And he's afraid that if this clan continues to grow, they'll outnumber us in Egypt and they'll take over. And so he puts them into slavery, as a taskmaster, and he puts them into bondage, bitter bondage, the Bible says. And so for 400 years, the house of Jacob, Israel, is in bitter bondage in Egypt. Are you still with me? Now, God had told Abraham this would happen. Genesis 15:13. God said that they would go into bondage for 400 years. You say, well, why? In that text, it doesn't tell us why. But Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 1 through 8, if you're taking notes, Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 1 through 8, God tells us why. Because while in that 30 years of prosperity in Egypt, they began to adopt the pagan gods of Egypt. They began to worship the Egyptian idols. And so God judges them with 400 years of bondage. Now they come out, ultimately, so they're in bondage until this guy shows up. Not Charlton Heston, Moses. And in Exodus chapter 6, God confirms his promise to give the children of Israel the land of Canaan. Exodus chapter 6, verse 8. And he's talking to Moses. And I will bring you in unto the land concerning the which I did swear to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it you for an heritage. I am the Lord. So you see this? Canaan, where you are, this land, Abraham, I promise you, and I promise your son, and I promise your grandson. And now God is extending that same promise to Jacob, Israel's descendants, through Moses, Israel. And he's saying, I'm going to give you the land that I promised to give Abraham. Now, so they crossed the Red Sea, and they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. And now, so they come. Why did they wander? Moses, God leads them to the land of promise. He leads them to Canaan. He's saying, this is now your land. Go in and possess it. And Moses, under the influence of the elders, he takes 12 spies. He calls for 12 spies, one from each of the tribes, and says, you guys go into the land and spy it out. And see what kind of land it is. See if it's good, see if it's bad, see if there's water, see if there's land. So you go check out the land, and then you come back and report. And 10 of the spies came back and said, oh, it's a beautiful land, but there are giants in the land. Everywhere you look, there are giants. And we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. What's wrong with that problem, with that picture? How do you know how they see you? But they were defeated in themselves, and they projected that defeat. Oh, we must look like grasshopper, like losers in the eyes of the giants. And so they came back and said, we can't go in. 2 of the 12 came back, Joshua and Caleb, and said, man, that's a great place. Let's go take it. What's the problem here? God never said, go and spy out the land and see if it's good. No, God said, it's good. And God said, it's a blessing, and I have promised it to you, and I'm giving it to you. Go and take it. And they said, we can't. We're afraid. And so God said, well, you're not ready. So 40 years of wandering in the wilderness until you get that out of your system. And because of that, only those 2, in that whole generation, only those 2 men, Joshua and Caleb, got to go into the promised land. Moses got to see it from the mountaintop, but he was not allowed to go in. Remember why? Because he smoked the rock the second time. Now let me fill this in, because this is important. Not so much to this, but important to understand. So what? He smoked the rock 2 times. No. Remember in Rephidim, at the rock of Horeb, the people were thirsty. There was no water for them to drink. And Moses cried out to God. And God said, smite the rock and the waters will flow. And Moses took his staff and he hit the rock, and from that rock living water flowed. And all of Israel drank the living water and they lived. Paul tells us, 2 Corinthians 10:4, that rock actually followed them. Whether it was a literal rock that followed them or whether it was figurative of God's supply, I don't know. But Paul says that rock that was smitten was Christ. And now they get to Zin, and it's another story, Numbers, I believe, 20. And the people cry out, there's no water for them to drink. And God says to Moses, okay, Moses, speak to the rock. Just speak to the rock, and the waters will flow. See, he was smitten. And when he was smitten, the living waters flowed, and it followed them. And God says, now just ask the rock. You just ask the rock. He's already been smitten. Ask the rock, and living waters will flow. But Moses is so frustrated with the people, constantly nagging, said, I'm so tired, and he whacks the rock with the stick. And this is the equivalent of crucifying Christ again. So God says, no, you don't understand what you've just done. You cannot go into the promised land because you have smitten the rock, because you have disrespected the rock. I told you, ask the rock, but no, you smote it twice. So Moses is not allowed to go in. He's able to see the promised land, and the Bible says that God buried him. God, we don't know where, we don't know. God took him home, but nonetheless, so here we are. So in Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, God confirms his promise with Joshua. Still with me? Joshua chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. So the same promise God is making. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your coast. So God is promising again this land of Canaan to now Joshua, who is leading Israel. In other words, God is saying, I've already given the land. Everywhere you step, it's already yours. Now, I know, let me just, because I love this. So Joshua is now ready to go into the promised land, and he's going to send spies. But you see, he was one of the two that came back with a good report, and he said, we ain't doing this again. I'm not sending 12 spies and run the risk of 10 coming back and saying, And so he only sends 2. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. 2 of us went in and said it was a good place. I'm only sending 2. And they're not going out to spy the land to see if it's good enough. They're going in to set up their plan, to see what we're going to do when we get there. And so they go in and they spy out the promised land, and you know the story. In 1451 BC, Joshua takes the city of Jericho in Canaan. This is the first city in the promised land, and Joshua takes it. The first city to be conquered. This is where Rahab the harlot is converted. This is once again Canaan becoming subservient to Shem. Just as God had said to Noah, right? You still there? Israel is now taking possession of the land of promise. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob sojourned there. Moses and Joshua were promised, but now they were becoming the owners. They were fulfilling God's promise when they went in. Joshua 10:1. Now it came to pass when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, had heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king, so he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. I give you this because Joshua 10:1 is the first mention of Jerusalem. Prior to this, Jerusalem is known as Salem or Jebus, where the Jebusites lived. So God his instruction to the children of Israel But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth. But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 through 17. So God had instructed the people, when you go into the promised land, utterly destroy every single Canaanite. You say, many wonder, how is this order of mass destruction of human life? How is this consistent with the revelation of God's love? You ever wonder that? People might ask you in this conversation, they may say, how could a God of love and mercy tell these Israelites to go in and totally annihilate all the people, men, women, children, animals, everything? How is that consistent with the love and mercy of God? First of all, this is God's righteous judgment on a desperately wicked people. Their idolatry involved every form of vile, filthy, violent sin. Sexual immorality was part of their worship to idols, and actually they were having sex with idols. They were sacrificing their children to Moloch, to false gods. They were taking their children and burning them on the fire to these false gods. It was sexually impure. It was violent. And they were unrepentant and uninterested in the God of creation. They were going to do what they were going to do. And over the years of the children of God sojourning in their land, they didn't accept anything of the God of these men and these people. And so God says, no, I'm going to judge this entire race. Complete destruction of the Canaanites would have been necessary to safeguard Israel from the overwhelming influence, evil influence, of Canaanite idolatry and sin. Still with me? Hey, Israel, I know what happened to you when I brought you to Egypt, to that land of prosperity. And instead of just enjoying the prosperity, you got involved with the false gods of the Egyptians. If I let you go into Canaan and allow them to continue, I know what you're going to get involved with the gods of the Canaanites. These unrepentant, evil people who have rejected me, so you need to remove them utterly so that you will not be affected. Why? God is looking out for his eternal plan, for the Messiah who would come and for the redemption of the world. And had Israel gone into Canaan and gotten perverted by the Canaanites, his eternal plan would not have been fulfilled. So God says, I'm giving you this land, but you've got to remove the inhabitants because they are vile, beyond measure, and unrepentant. You still with me? But Israel spared many of the Canaanites in disobedience to God's instructions. Now you have the time of judges, okay? After they go into the land, God sets up judges to rule and lead the people. After the judges, he establishes the time of the kings, Saul being the first king, and so he establishes the kings leading Israel. And then comes, so in all this time, you have the Israelites who are now in the land of Canaan, and all of this time, they're constantly fighting against this group of people, the Philistia. Notice here, what you're talking about, Gaza. You know that name? Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod. So Israel, at all the times of the judges and all the times of the kings, the land that they were promised, they're constantly in conflict with these Canaanites, especially Philistia, the Philistines. Gaza being a stronghold. Now, remember, this is the most famous battle between David and Goliath, the giant of Gath. He is from Philistia. This is the greatest, battle that you're familiar with. In 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4, David is anointed king over Judah, and he reigned from Hebron. He reigned from Hebron for 7.5 years, and he led his armies against the Jebusites, the city of Jebus. What's that? Jerusalem. And so this was what would be come to be known as Jerusalem, also called Zion. They took the city, and David established his throne in Jerusalem. He made Jerusalem the capital of Israel around 1000 BC. So this is like 3,000 years ago. King David made Jerusalem the capital of Israel, the land God promised them. If you look, several references in all of these, Jerusalem is called the city of God. The city of God, the city of God, the city of God. Israel is the apple of God's eye, right? So if Israel is the apple of God's eye, Jerusalem would be the pupil. It would be the center. Jerusalem is the center of God's love and affection. Jerusalem is the pupil of the apple of God's eye. Now, Jerusalem has been conquered or destroyed 36 times in these 3,000 years. Since David established his throne in Jerusalem, they have been conquered or destroyed 36 times. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 63 and 64, God had said through Moses, "And it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. And ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone." God is telling the Israelites, you're going to be scattered because you're going to rebel against me. And so in 722, we know about the Assyrian conquest, right? The Syrians came in, took over Jerusalem, took over Israel. Israel is led captive to Assyria. The Assyrians invaded and deported the Jews to Assyria. Then the Babylonians, after the fall of the Assyrian Empire, King Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, and the first temple is destroyed. So this is the first temple that Solomon had built, Solomon's temple. It's destroyed as the Babylonians, Assyrians, then the Babylonians conquer. Then the second temple, the Persian king Cyrus allows the Jews to return and rebuild. Remember? 538 BC. So you have under Cyrus, King Cyrus, under King Darius, King Artaxerxes, under Ezra, under Nehemiah, and the governor Zerubbabel. This second temple is now erected in, under King Cyrus, under these kings. And it's often referred to, the second temple, as Herod's temple. Well, if it was rebuilt back in then, well, how does Herod get any credit? Well, when Herod came to power, he updated the temple. It was in existence and it was operational, but Herod just put his touches to it, and so it's often called Herod's temple. But in 332 BC, the Jewish tribes revolted against the Greeks' occupancy. So the Greeks take over in 332 BC. The Jews revolted against the Greeks in approximately 164 BC. Now, from 142 BC to 80, for 80 years, Judea was once again an independent state. So Israel is back in control of their homeland. But the Romans in 63 BC invaded again. So Rome now takes over in 63 BC. And But the Jews once again rose up, and there's a revolt of 66 to 70 A.D. Still with me? So now the Jews, this is after the time of Christ, in the time of the apostles. So the Jews rose up against the occupancy of Rome, and the Emperor Titus came in with armies and squashed the revolt in 70 A.D., and the second temple, Herod's temple, was destroyed. So in 135 A.D., I said they were conquered or destroyed 36 times. So there's many times in between here to fill in the gaps, but in 135 A.D., a very famous invasion, the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now this is very, very important to understand regarding this whole presentation and this information and our position. You need to be careful that you grasp this. For 3 years, Jerusalem was under Jewish control. The Romans inevitably crushed them. They either deported them, sold them into slavery, or killed many of the Jews. And the Roman Emperor Hadrian leveled Jerusalem. To sever any connection the Jews might have, and therefore end any claim to the land, the Romans changed the name of the land from Judea to Palestina, which is the Latin version of Philistia. So there are no such things. By the way, at this time, there are no Philistines. Jeremiah 47:4, I believe in Amos, all the references where God says, I will completely annihilate the Philistines. And he did. Under the Babylonian time frame, Philistia, the Philistines are gone. There is no Philistines left on planet Earth. They are completely annihilated, wiped out by God. So there is no Philistines that have any claim to anything. They don't exist. Important to understand. Philistines are gone. But the Romans named this land Palestina, a Latin version of Philistia, so that the Jews could never go back and say, that's Israel, or that's Canaan that was promised to Abraham. No, the name of it now is Palestina, so the Jews could have no claim to it whatsoever. But the land called Palestine, but there was no such nation or people as Palestinians. There were no Palestinianites. There were no Palestinian. There was no such thing as a Palestinian. The land was occupied by the Arabs that were surrounding Israel. So when the Jews were scattered, the Arabs came in to take possession of the land. They're all Arabs. And so the inhabitants and residents of Canaan, now Palestina, are Arabs. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. There's no history of a Palestinian until the land was called Palestina, and so the Arabs are now called Palestinians. You with me on that? Okay, really, really important to understand. And this land has been ruled by Romans, Persians, Arabs, Crusaders, Mamelukes, Turks, and the Brits. 1917, Great Britain conquered Jerusalem. Great Britain, when they took possession of the land, they promised the establishment of a national home for the Jews who had been scattered all over the world. So now there is no place called Israel. There's no land that is named Israel. The Israelites are all over the world because they had been dispersed. And Great Britain says, now that we have taken possession of Israel, Jerusalem, we're going to make a land for the Jewish people to return to. We're going to make this, establish this so that they could come home. In 1922 to 1923, Britain's high commander to Palestine attempted to establish a home rule where both Jews and Arabs were to participate in the government. So it is Great Britain, they see the conflict, they see the problem. They see that the land is inhabited by Arabs, Palestinians, and that it belongs to the Jews that they're going to welcome to come back. And so Great Britain is trying to proctor a deal also with the League of Nations to say, well, let them rule together. So we can create a government where both these Palestinians and Jews rule together, and they can establish the land together, and they can live together in harmony. And the Israelites said, that sounds like a good idea. But the Arabs said, no way. And they refused to share power with the Jews. By the way, Rose, you could attest to this. Those who have been to Israel, listen, the Arabs that live inside of Israel proper, they're doing quite well. They go to school, they go to work, they do business, they have their temples, they have their mosques, they worship their, Muhammad and Allah, they do all that. They're prosperous, they enjoy the health system, they enjoy society. They're prospering in Israel. They're happy citizens of Israel, which could be the same case for any of the Arabs that would come and be a part of that land. They could coexist and enjoy the prosperity of Israel. But they've refused. They've rejected that whole scenario. I'm almost done. May 14th, 1948, the United Nations declared Israel's statehood. Said, okay, we'll acknowledge that because Great Britain's claim had expired. And so, okay, now Israel, it's yours. Thousands of Jews were displaced from Palestine, said, you can't be here anymore. You have to go, elsewhere. You have to go elsewhere. And the Arabs that remained in Israel became Israeli citizens. Now, the very next day, so that's May 14th, 1948, May 15th, 1948, the very next day, Israel was attacked. The joint armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq attacked the Jewish state of Israel. And when the final ceasefire came in the spring of 1949, Israel controlled 40% more of the land than that was proposed by the United Nations. The formation of PLO in January 1964, the Palestinians created a genuinely independent organization. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO, was established. They devised their own government, their own charter. They said, we are a people, we have claim to this land, we are a nation, we want to be represented in the United Nations, we are a country. Here's our flag, here we are. And they formed a charter. Now, I know you can't read this, and I don't expect you to. It's online. But this is the charter. And in the charter, there was explicit language that, with the explicit aim of achieving the liberation of Palestine from the Zionist entity. Now, that's not bad language. They just want to have liberty. They want to be delivered from the Zionists. Okay. But the language it's clear. Their one goal is the destruction of Israel, not just the end of Zionism. And we don't want to just end, we want to destroy Israel. That's their charter. In 1967, the then president of Palestine, Nasser, said that the Arabs' objective is the complete annihilation of Israel. So I didn't put this up here, but Hamas has a charter, Hezbollah has their own charter, and equally as clear as to their intent, complete annihilation of Israel. I'm almost done. 6-day war. Surrounded by Arab forces, Israel chose to strike first. Hey, you know, when somebody puts their arms up, don't wait for them to strike. Right? You got your arms up, I'm taking charge here. Right? And that's what they did. They saw the saber rattling, they saw the enemies mounting, and so they struck first. They went in, their warplanes, June 5th, 1967, Israeli warplanes bombed Egyptian airfields, destroying the entire air force of Egypt in a matter of hours. So now Israel asked Jordan, their neighbors, please stay out of this. And Jordan at first agreed, okay, we'll stay out of this. But then Egypt lied and boasted, we completely annihilated the forces of Israel. And so Jordanians were emboldened. Well, if Egypt has destroyed much of Israel, well, then we can attack too. And so they went against their pledge, and so they started shelling West Jerusalem, and in return, Israel destroyed their air force. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Syria bombed northern Israel. Iraq attacked Israeli targets. Israeli Air Force wiped out all of their air forces, and the war was over in 6 days. This is the land of Israel prior to the war of 67, and this is the land that they have now, 6 days later. You want to pick a fight with me? Israel conquered the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Desert, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank, including the city of David and the ancient city of Jerusalem. So now they pushed back the enemy and they took all of this land. Well, UN Resolution 242, the UN, again, they're going to step in, and they said, all right, here's the resolution. Israel would withdraw from the land, returning to the boundaries prior to the war. Israel's neighbors must recognize the Jewish state. And Israel accepted it. Israel was willing to negotiate land for peace, like they always are, and like they will again. And I don't know when. It could be in this whole scenario coming on us. But ultimately, Israel is going to give up land for peace. Which won't work, but that's the very reason that God judges Israel, Joel chapter 3, because you have divided my land, so we know it's going to happen. But Israel is willing, okay, we'll do what we got to do to coexist, but the entire Arab world rejected Resolution 242. The Arabs had passed their own resolution, Israel's military administration of the West Bank and Gaza. It's famously known as the Three No's. The Arab League responded with their declaration. It included the famous three no's. No to peace with Israel, no to recognition of the state of Israel, and no to negotiation. The land was promised to Abraham long before there was an Israel or a Palestine. It has been in the crosshairs of Satan from the beginning. Why? Because it's the apple of God's eye. The whole world has been against these people and this land. Today, the Arab nations have one goal, the absolute annihilation of Israel. We don't have time to go into all the details, but everything is falling into place now. I don't know if this that we're seeing, listen, I'm saying this only to tell you, this may very well be leading up to the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Whether this happens or not, here's what I'll say as I close. Now, as you see, there's a lot of wars and rumors of wars, and there's a lot of rattling of the sabers. And war is imminent. It's inevitable. Now, it could very well be that someone rises up before all of this happens. It could be today. Someone could rise up, some world leader, somebody maybe we know or somebody we don't know, who can bring about say, wait, let's just stop for a moment and let's look at what's going to happen. We're talking about nuclear war. So why don't we call a pause for 7 years? We'll have some kind of agreement here where we just put it aside for 7 years. And maybe there isn't a war because there's a peace agreement that's signed. That's Daniel 9:27. That begins the tribulation period. Or maybe the war begins, and maybe there's atrocities, maybe it's terrible, and the world says, this is so bad, we have to do something. And someone rises up and says, let's call a ceasefire for 7 years. I don't know the scenario, but Scripture tells us that there's going to be a peace agreement that is signed and affirmed by some world leader, and that begins the 7 years of tribulation. Now, right in that place, I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I believe right in that place, we're going up. And the marriage supper of the Lamb will begin, and for 7 years we will enjoy the marriage supper while tribulation is going on down here. The church will come back with Christ to set up his kingdom for 1,000 years. Now, people have asked me, and there's a lot of talk about, about the judgment of God and about the plagues and about, mid-trib, post-trib, pre-trib. I told you what Charles Greenaway said, just get ready for the first one. The first, whenever the rapture is, just be ready for it.